So thank you for joining Taft Communications DEI in the Workplace, a national perspective webinar. We are excited to share insights from our soon to be released national survey and for you to hear from 3 DEI leaders who are making a positive difference throughout their organizations. But first, a bit of housekeeping. Currently and towards the end of today's webinar, you will see a few pop-up poll questions. They'll come and go quickly as we want to stay focused on our topic. Yet your participation in answering the questions is both helpful and appreciated. At any time during today's session, you may ask questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Also at the bottom of the screen is a prompt to turn on closed captions. Once again, welcome. My name is Sheila Court, and I'm a Senior Director and DEI Lead at Taft Communications. My more than 30 years of corporate, agency, and consultant work spans across various industries, focused on internal and external comms, strategic planning, leadership communications coaching, and diversity communications. At Taft, along with leading our DEI communications sector, I also head Taft ClearPoint, a leadership communications practice that helps to strengthen communication skills for individuals and teams. Joining me today as panelists are Bill Bradshaw, Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Witham. Bill leads the firm's I&D initiatives and oversees its strategy and objectives, including attracting and advancing diverse leaders and fostering an inclusive, accessible, and authentic workplace. He also collaborates with leadership to provide broad perspectives and innovative client solutions. In 2019, Bill was named the annual NJ Outpower list for his work leading LGBTQ workplace inclusion. Also joining us is Cecilia Nelson, Director of People Development and Belonging at NRG Energy. Cecilia heads the newly formed People Development and Belonging team at NRG. Previously, she led employee relations for the North America division of Direct Energy, where she contributed, identified, and filled gaps that resulted in policy development, cultural change, and undertook inspections of key diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Cecilia has held progressive roles in human resources, compliance, and legal organizations. And finally, Subarna Malakar, Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Sanofi North America. Subarna, Head of DEI for Sanofi, leads the company's DEI strategy that is integrated with the overall business and talent strategies. He has 15 years of experience in DEI, corporate responsibility, culture change management, and organizational and talent development. Subarna is also a member of Sanofi's North America HR leadership team and a member of Global Diversity, Experience, and Culture. Welcome, Bill, Cecilia, and Subarna. Before we begin, I want to share that for the past 6 years, Taft Communications has conducted an annual New Jersey State of Diversity survey. This year, we partnered with Rutgers University Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling to conduct a national survey to assess attitudes towards DEI in the workplace and gain insights into day-to-day realities. This year's State of Diversity poll is the impetus for today's roundtable discussion. So with that, let's begin. I'll start with Cecilia. Cecilia, one notable finding from the Taft National Poll is that people are much more likely to interact at work with people of other races and ethnicities than they're likely to do so outside of work. 68% said such interaction happens daily at work, and only 50% say these interactions happen outside of work. What does this say to you about the opportunities that the workplace presents to promote diversity and increase understanding among various groups in ways that maybe just doesn't take place anywhere else?
So it stands to reason, right? This makes sense, that at work, we spend so much of our time with one another. And so, you know, most of our connections are made at work, right? Our friends, you know, admittedly, and I was very frank about this, you know, I met my spouse at work. We did not work together, but he was a vendor, right, who visited my workspace. But I think, and Bill will speak more to this, but there is some intentionality, right? Because there is a cost, right? While I love the premise of hybrid working, right, and remote working, and these offerings that we have now for employees, I think that there's a cost to that will prompt the intentionality, right? The cost is we're not interacting with everyone, different backgrounds and that sort of thing on a daily basis, right? We are interacting much like we are today, right? We are remote, we are in our homes and in other parts, maybe some people are working from a lake home or what have you, but we're no longer together. And so our organization does promote in the workplace, outside, given our COVID restrictions, but in the workplace, we are promoting different activities in order to get our employees to do something for the greater good together, right? So that we are having those interactions.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You mentioned intentionality, right? It's kind of up to us to engage and take advantage of that opportunity, of the diversity that we're surrounded by. Bill, Cecilia mentioned your names. What are your thoughts in regard to what's happening in the workplace and what's not happening outside of the workplace, and how we can make the most of it?
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me here today. It's great to have the conversation. I think one of the things that we have to be intentional about is those connections. Like, what are we doing to intentionally connect with folks that are not like us, that don't share the same lens as us, that don't show or experience the firm or the organization like we do? And there is that intentionality piece to it, because now that many of us are working hybridly, we're working remotely. How do we have those interactive conversations? They have to be timely. We have to literally set up time to do that. And I think the other piece here is, our biases show up a bit, right? When this happens. So we have that safety bias, right? We tend to gravitate towards people that are like us in a pattern of this was safe for us. So what are we doing as leaders, and what can we do to help our employees and our team members show up and feel like they can be themselves, move outside of that, safety that they've been used to, and really explore that, not only inside of work, but also outside of work. Because many times we're put together on teams, we don't have the option, right? But then we leave those teams and we go home back to our safety. So how can we help intermesh that work-life integration piece and really push and move the needle forward?
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. So Barna, did you want to make any comment in regard to that? That safety bias, that intentionality, what's happening in the workplace?
No, like I think Cecilia said, right? We are spending more time together at work, and we really need to really champion those differences that we have at work and have those discussions. Because I think when we think about how, even when the diversity has started, is really started from a corporate environment versus any other place, right? So corporates are actually leading the way to have these discussions. So yeah, I agree with Bill and Cecilia in terms of their comments.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, it's championing differences. I love that, right? It's so important to do that. Bill, the survey also revealed that solid majorities of employed adults feel as if it's the employer's responsibility, right? So not surprising, we're in the workplace, we see diversity, so people are looking to their employers to really champion diversity. Hence, the roles that we all play in our organizations. 56% in the survey say that employers should commit to increase efforts towards diverse hiring practices. We hear that a lot, right? About diverse slates. 59% say employers should make efforts to build a more inclusive workplace culture. Yet, people aren't so favorable towards them engaging in other activities. And I know you guys will have some wonderful comments to this, right? Only about 4 in 10 feel like they really want to see their employer make public statements or give donations to groups or publish op-eds. What are your thoughts on that? What should employers take from this? We'll start with Bill.
Yeah, I would say, and this is one of my sweet spots, and I work a lot with our leadership team. I sit on our leadership team, I coach them. Um, Silence is deafening, is what I always say to them. To say nothing is worse than to say something. Couple things here. You're never going to get it right. It's always going to fall short to somebody. But saying nothing is the worst thing that we can do in this space. I would say another thing here is really holding our leaders accountable. So leaders like myself holding our most senior leadership accountable and asking them to be active and engaging in the things that we're doing. So that stems from attending our ERG meetings, taking the required training with our people. Let them see you in the webinar or in the in-person training, right? Have that action, those action items be put in place by all of our leadership, right? I think that's one of the things that's important. I think the other piece here, when it comes to what can our leaders do, they can lean in, they can be active, they can listen. And it's not just about making that statement, it's putting that statement into action, right? So we can make statements, we can make sign on the line to intentionalities, signatories, etc. But where does the rubber meet the road, right? Are you really taking what you're saying and putting it into place? And I think that many times, we as D&I practitioners and leaders, we don't always get the opportunity to sit with those leaders, but now we're sitting at those tables, we're having those conversations. And with them, one of the most unique, fun things for me right now is we are in the middle of our chairman change. So our current CEO, managing director of the firm is retiring, and we have a new leader coming in. And one of the first things he said was, "Bill, what do you need from me? What can I do?" So these leaders they want this, right? They're sponges. They want us to be able to support them. They know that they're not going to get it right all the time, but we also have to help them be vocal. And I say at the end of the day, this work is all about awareness and acknowledgement. So anything we do in a diversity and inclusion equity space is making sure that you are aware and acknowledging what's going on around you.
Yeah, you bring up many excellent points. Awareness, critical, right? Okay, I know there's a problem, acknowledging it, but then showing up and doing something, right? So incredibly powerful. Sabarna, what are your thoughts? As the survey revealed, some folks, they don't care about seeing the op-ed necessarily. And to Bill's point, they want to see action first, right? Take care of the home first, right? Let's make a change and difference here. And then let's kind of go out and spread the good. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I think Bill made a good point, in terms of getting your leadership committed to this, right? But, in this day and age, employees know if the leaders or the company is just talking or are they walking, right? They can sniff out the BS. You know what I'm saying? So they can really sniff out the BS. So we will only know if the actions that are successful if the employees are saying so. You need to have a top down. At the same time, you need to have a grassroots level engagement from our employees. And you could do it in many different ways in terms of getting that voice of our employees through your employee engagement survey or through your employee resource group, or even have a focus group on the side. The other thing I will say is, we as an organization have been really focused on being transparent with our data, right? Data don't lie, right? So we are showing the data, and sometimes when I attend these leadership meeting and they talk about, oh, you guys are doing, we have been doing this diversity work for a while, but when I show the data, they're surprised that we have not made the increase or progress that should be there, right? So those are the two things. I think employee voice matter because they can really sniff out the BS, and then being transparent about your data, not only with the leadership team, but with your employee base, because they want to see progress, right? If they don't see the progress, that you can be doing all this talking, donating, all of that stuff, which is important, but at the same time, there's a progress that needs to be made around this topic.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, because you hit it on the head when you say leaders don't know what they don't know, right? So a CEO, a chairman, their job is to oversee the organization, and they have the best people in place, like the 4 or 5 of us here, to help them get there, right? So they don't know what they don't know. It's our job to tell them what they don't know, right?
Exactly.
And then it's also our jobs to armor them to have those uncomfortable conversations and those candid conversations and know how to respond. Because I think the problem is our employees don't hear their voice. Our employees hear our voice, right? So they need to hear their voice in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Cecilia, I see you nodding quite a bit. Do you have any comment you want to make to this?
And the nuggets that are being dropped by both Bill and Savarna are like so inspiring. But you know, and I've said this before. I mean, all of this is the don't talk about it, be about it, right? That's that. And listen, I for those of you that don't know, I sit in Texas, but I am a Brooklyn girl through and through, and so I believe in that, right? So the don't talk about it, be about it. I think that's where the published op-eds and the very public things tend to be lost on the you know, the employee population, because they're like, well, let's not talk about those things. What are we doing in house? How are we taking care of our own house? Because those things seem to be very geared to accolades from outside the organization, and what we are, all of us are working towards is the buy-in from our employees. They're the ones that matter.
Yeah. Oh, excellent point. Excellent point. Sabarna, our poll also found that on many issues, significant differences exist according to age, race, gender, and partisan affiliation. For example, though an overwhelming majority views diversity as important in the workplace, and you guys won't find this surprising, women are much more likely than men to say it is very important. Democrats are far more likely than Republicans to feel that way, and Black people much more likely than whites. Sabarna, what do such divides tell us about the underlying attitudes and the work that still needs to be done? I mean, we're talking about a lot of wonderful things, but there's work to be done.
Absolutely. And this work has amplified, right, Sheila, since, you know, May 2020 with George Floyd's murder. It has amplified. And we live in a current environment where there's a division, right, in the US especially. There's a division within the society, you know. So how do we ensure that in the workplace, you know, we try to be more inclusive, you know, create that inclusive workplace culture? And it actually goes with the word inclusion and equity. You know, for me, how do we ensure that we get white cisgender males to talk about diversity and not really sit on a sideline, right? When you talk to some of our white, you know, colleagues, white male colleagues, they will say diversity means is people of color or women. You know, I don't have my role. I don't see where I could fit in, you know. So for me, it's like, how can we ensure that, you know, the white men are the champion of diversity? And one of the things that we have done as an organization, I don't know if Cecilia and Bill have as well, is, you know, we partnered with an organization called Catalyst, and they have a really amazing program called MARC, which is Men Advocating Real Change. I don't know if I like the name or not, but, you know, that's the name that I have put together. But that program has been really profound for some of our white male colleagues in terms of the experience they have gone through, the exercise they talk about, where the privilege exercise, you know, when you are sitting, when you're standing and you take a step forward or step back, right? That those type of you know, training has really helped us. The other is, when we talk about diversity, it's not a zero-sum game. It's just like one wins, the other loses. It's not that. Everybody has a role to play. If you're a talent in the organization, you have a future in our organization, in our growing organization, right? So the thing is also, you have to listen to every voice. Like I said, employee voice matters, right? And we also have to hear counter voices. And that's what the inclusion is all about, right? But the tone of voice has to be clear from the top in terms of the importance of the diversity, equity, inclusion, not just the business case, because I think I'm tired of business case. We already know what that business case is. But it has to make sure that importance of equity, ensuring that everyone has a fair share of opportunities in this organization. So that's
Mhm.
all I will say, Sheila.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, Sabarna. When you said listen to every voice, hear counter voices, right? As we go about doing this work, we need to create that safe space for counter voices. We need to have those, I think Bill said it, difficult conversations, right? Those uncomfortable conversations. Cecilia, what are your thoughts on that with how we're showing up and how we're meeting people where they are and helping them to recognize some of the issues that we're just talking about?
Sheila, you hit it right on the head with me in particular with the use of the term how we showing up, right? Like DE&I, it impacts people differently. It affects people differently. People have very different perceptions. And I think Bill and Sabarna touched on this, right? Where, some people view diversity as, we have women, see, um, um, and then, understanding what these actual divides mean to people, right? Meeting people where they are is just really getting to understand. It's listening to those voices that Sabarna was talking about. It is really then translating those voices to all of our positions with senior leadership, right? I take what I hear on the streets, from employees that are working in our plant operations, and I then translate that when I am talking to my CEO, who is very open to having conversations with me, right? To my EMT member, so, my executive management team member. I'm translating that because what it is making sure that the voice that is not always heard is actually heard. I don't really understand this diversity thing, Cecilia. I mean, what are you telling me? Is this about Black people? Is this about Hispanic people? Is this about women, right? Because I don't really see what the problem is. And then explaining, and sometimes it's just education. That's all it is.
Yeah, I would add, Sheila, and that was cool, Cecilia, because I would say I've had this conversation so many times, and working in professional services, it is what it is, right? It is a lot of white men. Like, it is what it is. So I think back to the point of calling out the demographics, it's important. But here's the other thing is we need to affirm that a white person is not non-diverse. So, like, I had to say that in your head a few times, like, a white person is not non-diverse. And people look at me when I say that, and I say, okay, the only thing about you that makes you unique is that you're white, like, and I'll sit back, and I'm like, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. Oh, I have 2 daughters, or I have a grandson that has a disability, or I served in the military. All of a sudden, your lenses of diversity show up. But if you're only gonna come to us with, I'm a white cisgender male, you're shut off to it until we have those conversations. So it's really having that candid conversation across difference and really digging deeper below the surface into that iceberg to say, hey, what really makes up your iceberg? Who are you really? Where are those lenses that show up? And all of a sudden the light bulbs start going off and you start seeing, and then they start becoming champions of this work that you're doing, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm a father of 2 women who are in college and I want them to have the same opportunity that I had to become partner of the firm. Ding, 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 women advocacy, right? Like, you have to connect their points on where they are. They're not seeing them because they are like, I'm just another white guy. So our job is to help them uncover what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, I mean, if I could
Go
make a
ahead, Sabarna.
comment, Sheila. No, I think
Please.
it's the vulnerability, right? The conversation that you have with the other. It starts with the conversation first of all, right? Because you could to Bill's earlier point in terms of the bias, you may have these implicit bias around certain individual, but if you don't have a conversation and really go deeper into the what's below the surface of that iceberg, right? you will not get to the diversity conversation that we want to have. But you have to be vulnerable to have those conversations to begin with, you know. So that's just one point I wanted to make around. Yes, the tip of, you know, the iceberg is important, but what's underneath the iceberg is very important, and you can only get through that with the conversation.
Oh, yeah. We all know about those images of the iceberg and what lies
We
beneath,
do.
right? There's
We
so
do.
much that lies beneath. I remember one powerful exchange. I was happy to be in, to quote Hamilton, in the room where it happened, working with an organization and having the opportunity to bring Dr. Mahzreen Banaji to speak to their audience, right? All the heads are nodding, we love it, right? Predominantly white audience, male white audience. And just her talking about implicit bias and understanding that we all have it. Bill, to your point, like we're all in this together, right? We're all experiencing these things. The light bulbs that went off in that room, and just you could just see all the tension kind of go down and be like, okay, I want to know more, right? Kind of goes to what you said before, Cecilia. You know, they're asking those questions. What is this about? Like, is this just about Black people or Hispanic people? Like, what more can I do? Where can I learn and what can I learn? Powerful, powerful conversations that we're having across our organizations. You know, Bill, going back to another point that was made in our survey, well, not a majority, a significant amount, about 10 to 23%, depending on the category, say they've been discriminated against, right? And this could be due to their age, race, gender, physical or mental ability, sexual preference, or religion. You might not be surprised to hear this either, that, you know, Black respondents are more likely to report being discriminated against at work based on their race than whites. And those who report having a disability are 3 times more likely to say they've been discriminated against versus those who have no physical or mental ability or disability issues or concerns. Okay, it's not a big number, right? So, Bill, glass half full, half empty? Is this good? Is this bad? And, you know, should we be troubled that here we are, you know, 3 decades into the 21st century and we're still at these numbers? What should we do?
Yeah. So when we looked at this, and then I looked at it again this weekend, I noodled on it a bit, and I'm like, I don't think those numbers are always accurate, because I think they're underrepresented. I think that we're not capturing, folks are not, historically, I'll say, individuals, employees have not been so vocal with the actions that have happened to them that were inappropriate, disrespectful, discriminating, etc. Right? We have now a shift in mindset, a shift in the way people work, how people work, and we've given folks a voice, which I think is a great thing to do. And when I look at those numbers, I'm like, wow, they're small, because again, I don't think that they're encumbersome of all of the things that have happened. And I think some folks are afraid to report, or because they're just in jeopardy. Is their job in jeopardy if they say something? There might not be a culture or a mechanism on how to report it. And I think the larger piece of there is, what is the mechanism on how to report these issues, right? And you know, there's different tactics that are out there. Organizations use different things, and I think that the really important thing is we now have given folks the voice. We need to help them come through and have that voice. And you know, maybe those numbers will start to shift. I don't know, right? But what I can tell you, as a practitioner doing this for 10 plus years, this doesn't seem like it matches up to the stories that I hear day in and day out. When sometimes I wear, you know, the LSW hat, or the PhD hat, or the, you know, counselor on call hat, like whatever it happens to be, because those stories come to us, right? And I always say, you know, the next thing I need to do, if you come and tell me about an action, a reportable action, is I have to report that action. So I'd also like to dig down on reportable versus individual, or reportable versus the HR D&I leader who has to report that action. I would love to see if there was more data, but like I said, I just think, knowing what I know, they are a bit underrepresented.
Bill, you bring up a good point, and kind of going back to my mention of unconscious bias, microaggressions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us are running and reporting those? Now, we feel uncomfortable in the moment. We might write it off as like, oh, maybe they didn't mean it, right? But it's happening. And you know, I think of microaggressions as this little thing that chips away over time, right? The first time you might not say anything. The second time you might not say anything. The third time you're like, wow, what's going on here, right? You know, but to your point, Bill, 3-4 times in, I haven't reported any of this. I haven't really talked about it. I haven't brought this to my ERG for conversation. So it's not being tracked or reported. So I think you hit the nail on the head of there's layers to all these things. Cecilia, I see you nodding quite a bit. What are your thoughts on this?
So Bill, he touched a nerve in a good way. So one, absolutely. I know these numbers are underrepresented because I'm part of that underrepresented number, right? Have I talked openly about things that have happened to me in my career? Absolutely not. You know, recently, yes, there's definitely a place for it. And what we need to get to is, one, my team I still have employee relations under me, as well as DE&I, as well as L&D. Where it needs to start, though, is with the psychological safety piece, right? So people will report when they feel comfortable to report with a mechanism that gives them the safety to report. So reporting this to your HR manager or reporting something that has happened to you to your manager, and that is the mechanism, the only mechanism, is not going to work in an organization. Being able to have the ability to report anonymously through a third party. So, you know, I'm going to sing the praises real quick. We've both DE and NRG have used Ethics Point for a million years, which is now, you know, but it allows everyone, all of the stakeholders, myself, my leader, compliance, to be able to see these things real time, and they can be anonymous, or you can give your name. So that's one. So I think the psychological safety thing comes first, right? Saying as an organization, we want you to feel comfortable, even if it's the CEO. We want you to feel comfortable that you can report it. And here's where you can do it. And no, we cannot track it. We don't run it. We do not run administration on the third party mechanism. It comes to us, and it's our responsibility to act. But yeah, you know, like Bill, you hit it. Have I talked about those things openly? No. Have I talked about it in my group of girlfriends and we're all in HR and legal? Absolutely. But having the discussion, and maybe part of it does start with me, so that I can say, I'm a part of that. It's happened to me too. And here's what I would like you to do that I didn't do.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Sheila, if I can make a comment,
Please.
you know, I think for me, whatever the number is not acceptable, right? Whatever it is, it's not acceptable. Going back to your comment around the microaggression, you know, is there a role to play for, you know, your team? If they see something that's happening from a microaggression standpoint, and they see repeated, to your point, it happens once, it happens twice, you know, is there a mechanism for, you know, your team members or other members who's not happening, we're seeing this is happening to others, can they speak up? Can we create an environment, a culture for others to speak up as well? Because it's not something that individuals has to go through by themselves. It has to be something that could be in a way address it, right? The others can address it as well. Like almost like, you know, when you go to the airport, if you see something, say something, right? You have to, you know, have the same type of mechanism or a culture to call it out. If you see a microaggression happening, there has to be a way to call that out, you know, in a safe way, a safe way.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Like Cecilia talked about that psychological safety and the opportunity for anonymity, right? To report those things. But, you know, the interesting thing is, and I'm sure you all experience this, and I'm sure many of those who are viewing this webinar today have experienced this, is people saying, what is a microaggression, right? We know when certain things are said, we feel a little uncomfortable. Is that a microaggression? Do I report it? I'm making a big deal out of it. So education is so critically important throughout an organization. I'm currently working right now on a couple of diversity modules. One, it talks about unconscious bias and microaggressions. And, as I put out statements that are microaggressions, you get the eyebrow raising. Really? That's a microaggression? I'm like, yeah, that's a microaggression, and here's why. It's not just saying it, but it's explaining here's why. I think
Sheila,
we'll have a wonderful opportunity to do that. Go ahead, Cecilia.
let's get together because my team just created and piloted a microaggressions micro learning.
Yeah.
And it went over really well. We piloted it with part of the HR team and part of the larger administration team that we fall under. And we got a lot of, wow, that's a microaggression. And I was very candid and did report, Bill, a microaggression. And here's the thing. It was by someone who I know absolutely adores me, but had no idea that he was microaggressing me.
Right.
So it's, let's talk.
Sounds good. Well, I want to kind of shift my gear, kind of to give you all an opportunity. Today, we've been talking about a number of different things, microaggressions, unconscious bias, psychological safety, CEO engagement, involvement, intentionality. So those are some of the issues and concerns. Like, what does success look like? For those who are watching today, what tips, what information would you give them? Just pick one of those areas, right? Because we can't, we can't eat the whole piece, but what does success look like in any of those areas? And what do we do to make it stick in our organizations? So Barna, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, Sheila, in terms of, what is that one thing that could stick, right? I think, at Sanofi, we really view diversity, equity, inclusion as a business strategy, not an HR strategy, right? So it's part of everything that we do, and it's much bigger than just focusing on the workforce or a workplace. We are focused on also diversity in our community, right? Because we know the work that we need to do, it really to make a systemic change happen in the world that we live in. We have to ensure that we are also connected and transforming the diverse communities that we have. So I will say to really treat diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business strategy versus just a siloed HR strategy.
It's a great, excellent point. Excellent point. Bill or Cecilia?
Yeah, I would echo that, Summer. And I would also say, I would take it a step further to say, when we are put in these roles and we are selected to be leaders in this space, having that seat at the table with those leaders to have those conversations, because it's a two-way street. We listen to what the strategy of the organization is, and we feed back how that can happen from the lenses of what our specialty is. And I say that to say, not everyone experiences the organization or the firm, et cetera, the same way. Not everyone gets the same development opportunities that they need. Not everyone gets the same, promotion path, et cetera. So we need to be actively at the table when those conversations are happening. So to me, success is I sit right in those meetings. I have a voice at that table so they can hear me have those, so I can hear and have candid conversations in real time, not someone bringing it back to me that said, this is what was said, and this is what was said, and this is what was said. I think that's success. And I think the other piece is, for me in my career, it's when leaders come to me first before they go out and say, hey, I'm going to do this. They come to me first and say, hey, I'm going to do this. This is what it's going to look like. Is there anybody else's eyes that you think should be put on that? And I say that because this is where we empower our ERGs. We empower our people to feel like they are part of this. I'll give you a real live example. When we were messaging about the verdict of the murder of George Floyd, right? We wanted to put out, our chairman, CEO wanted to put out a message. We worked in conjunction, and then I said, let's throw this over to our ERG, our Block ERG, and let them put their ears and eyes on it. Are we missing anything? How does it fall on them, right? Because they are also part of that. So I think really success is engaging all of your people, letting all of your people understand, and all those connection points coming to one.
That's an excellent point. Cecilia?
Needless to say, I echo both amazing comments from my counterparts here. I really do feel like, one, the business aspect of DEI and in my my role and belonging, right? It has to be separate and above from an HR initiative, right? We have power, we have values, and then we have power values. Those power values must be acted on. They come with accountability. But to organizations, so I feel lucky, and I'm so proud of both Bill's and Subarna's organizations for the roles they play and the roles that their organizations allow them to play. Don't put me in this role and then I'm just hearing, but you won't allow me to do my job, which is sometimes uncomfortable for our leaders. And that is to hold everyone accountable. So the things that we are saying openly, allow Bill, Subarna, and myself to act on those things, allowing your DE&I leader to do their job. Because my job is then to say, okay, this is where we're falling short, or this is where we're doing well. And these are the actions behind that. Success to me looks like consistency, right? That's what it looks like to me. Consistently having these conversations or variations of them. They're not going to be the same every year. Where, God help us. I hope we don't have another 2020, right?
Yeah.
I hope we don't. I'm going to be completely transparent with all 300 of my friends on this call, and to say that 2020 was the most difficult year I have had in my 30-something years in HR. The most difficult, both professionally, emotionally, right? Spiritually, it was a difficult year for me. But that's going to change. And so we need to be consistent about the messaging about DEI and B, its importance, how we explain it. It's very different, right? Different people, like we talked about meeting people where they are. Explaining DE&I and why it's so important to our leaders is very different than explaining it to the employee population. Because to our leaders, this is what they hear, and we all know it.
Yeah.
Right? But explaining it in a way that we are being consistent in our messaging. Like, I want to hear about this after I leave. After I retire, I want to hear everybody saying, we're still talking about that thing, and we changed it, and it looks like this now, but it's still the consistent message.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your transparency in that, and for reminding all of us how challenging the work is, how challenging the environment has been. 2020, 2 years ago, we're still feeling it. And on a lot of levels, we still should, right? Let me ask you this as we near, I want to devote some time for Q&A, but I'm going to do a fast round robin with all of you, because our counterparts are listening. They're tuning in today to listen to us, right? We have chief diversity officers and head of DEI and those who are ambassadors and champions for DEI in their organizations listening to us right now. What final tip would you give them? And I love the filter that Cecilia said, this is hard work. It's been tough. And 2020 might have been your toughest year, but it doesn't mean that 2021 wasn't tough. 2022 won't be tough, and 2023 and on, there will be challenges. Let's start with Bill.
I would say my bit of advice is lean in with your people. And I don't mean check in on things that in regards to any of work performance, anything like that. Check in on your people, right? Check in on your people from a mental health perspective, from a physical space, from where are you doing from a work-life integration, because I don't say work-life balance because nothing's ever balances. Checkbooks don't balance, not work life isn't going to balance. Check in, lean in, have those conversations, and encourage every single person on your team to do the same. It's not how are you, it's how are you. You know, it's the second how are you that you need to have. And folks need to be, you need to start having those conversations. So the second how are you, you actually get out from those folks how they are and what you can do to support them.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Subarna?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Sheila, in terms of, what Cecilia talked about, the moments of 2020 and 2021, how can we ensure those moments that we went through really create a movement, right? Moving from moment to movement and really sustain the effort that we are in. And I mean, in terms of, yes, we could have this, we as a DNI practitioners, we have, 10 key elements of diversity, success, all this stuff, went out the door when 2020 happened, right? So, it's really around having a committed leaders. It's really around hearing the employee's voice, really empowering the employees to share their voice, utilizing the employee resource group or business resource group to help that grassroots level engagement to the top. I mean, those are some of the things I will say to really make those to moments into a movement and really sustain the effort around DNI. This is not a flavor of the month or a right thing to do. This is something that we really need to think about as a like I said earlier, a business strategy, right? This is not something that is something that is, it is CEO's agenda, or this is, it's not that. This is something that makes sense for how companies should be operating.
Wonderful. And Cecilia, I'll give you the final tip before we go into Q&A.
No worries. And so two things, right? One is, in order for you to have the second how are you conversation that Bill described and to move, right? And I'm not going to use my hip hop reference, but I really want to say move the crowd and then I'm done. Okay. But in order to move, right, this initiative, as Subarna mentioned, I'm going to say this, and for my colleagues who have known me for a million years who might be on this webinar, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to be contradictory of things that I've said in the past. Please be vulnerable. If you give of yourself, if when you say that second, how are you? And that person says to you truthfully how they are, you can be vulnerable too if you're feeling the same way, because that resonates. If you're moving with people, you are giving them a piece of yourself in order to move the needle on this initiative or several initiatives that have spawned from it. And also to keep your own sanity, everyone. It is not a destination, it is a journey. It will continue. If you are just trying to get from here to there, and then you're like, boom, we have done DE&I, you are going to be mad every day at yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So just give yourself grace that this is a whole journey and keep moving with it.
Wonderful. Excellent tips. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. So I want to remind everyone that's tuning in that you can submit your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to check for the first questions that are coming in. And while I'm doing that, I think there's one final poll question that we have for you, and that should be popping up soon. Let's look at the questions that are coming in. Oh, very interesting questions. All right. All right. So this is our final poll question that you see in front of you. And then I'm going to go to the first question. I'll ask the question, and Sabarna, Bill, Cecilia, whomever would like to answer that question, feel free. Our first question is, how do we get leadership's buy-in within a small organization? There are no ERG groups, and DEI recently became a conversation when I brought it up. This is a question from one of our attendees. It's that small organization, some of us work for large organizations and it's quote unquote a little easier because we have the power of layers, but in a small organization, this person sounds like the one voice.
Yeah, I'll share. I mean, I didn't always work in, the largest of firms and whatnot, and everyone's kind of started somewhere. And I remember feeling that I had to raise my hand and take that up and ask that question, like this individual may have done. But be careful what you do, because then all of a sudden you become the point person or the go-to person. So get ready. If you're going to ask the question, be ready to take on the assignment, because that's what they're going to say. Number one. Number two is get involved and start amplifying voices of others that might be in doing this work, right? So folks like ourselves, follow other folks on LinkedIn that may not be like yourself, and look for that groundswell. So I would always say small organizations start at that council level where you have some representation amongst the firm or the organization that you work for, small, 5 to 7 people that are like, have this passion. And I say, take your passion, turn it into action. It's my famous quote. I tell everybody, don't tell me you're passionate about it and don't do anything with it. Put what you really put it behind it. Make some sort of business strategy, some sort of business case to do this work, present it to leadership, get a little budget, and get some people behind you, some of those thought partners, the catalysts, the diversity best practices that are out there. Because if you don't have people to do it, you're going to need the experts that are on the sidelines that have already done it and can hand it to you in a box with a nice bow on it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for that. So here's our next question. My CEO often feels like sending an internal thoughts and prayers email is sufficient to respond to current events that are impacting our staff and clients. How can I kindly advise her that she needs to do more?
Yeah, I mean, I have had these conversations, right, Sheila? So, in the organization, I think you just have to be real, right? You just have to be real with your conversation. In terms of thoughts and prayers are important, but you have to really move to an action piece. What Bill is talking about, going from passion to action, right? What else can you do? Because we have heard thoughts and prayers forever, So really having an authentic conversation, really being real with that leader in terms of, this is thoughts and prayers are not cutting it. We need to talk about a little bit more in terms of, putting a little bit more thought into how can we address this situation.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It's like, what more, right? Okay, this is great, but what can we do, right? Not just say, what can we do?
Bring actionable items, like tell them, bring actionable items, like thoughts and prayers don't work, but this does. Can you try this? Like bring to them what your ideas might be, right?
And it's evolution of thought as well, right? Like those same socks that you gave me 2 years ago for Christmas, like they were nice and they kept my feet warm and it's a nice sentiment. But guess what? We need to have evolution of thought what are we going to do this year? What will we say now? And, and then one size socks does not fit all, by the way.
Yeah.
So very true. Oh, another question here. I'm starting a new position as a DEI leader in a new organization. You have any tips on how to get started? New position, new company coming in.
Yeah, I'll share, Sheila. What I would say is the best advice that I received from a leader when I started doing this 12 years ago or so, do your listening and learning tour. And that means from the top all the way down to the bottom. Take 30 days, 60 days to really have intentional conversations with folks at all different levels across the organization, and then assess where they're at and start from that point. Build out a strategic framework of what you want, future state, but realize you are here. And don't, yes, keep future there and look for aspirations on how to get there. But remember, when people tell you where they're at and you get your assessment from those conversations, that truly is where you're at and probably a little bit below, because they're selling you a little bit. So if whatever they're telling you in that first 30 to 60 days, it's really what's happening, probably minus 10%, and start there, and then build off that.
Yeah, I mean, Sheila, I will say two things. One is what Bill is saying, do really the qualitative work, the focus group, all of that, right? But also look at the quantitative, if you can get the data, your HR data to see, the representation, the hiring, the promotion, the turnover data around your diversity demographics here in the US, I think that will tell you the story as well, right? And see where the opportunity areas are. So quantitatively, do some digging, and then also qualitatively do some of the work that Bill is talking about.
No, thank you so much. And I love and hate this part of a webinar where we have to say goodbye and we have to end this. There are still several questions here that are really wonderful. And I need to kind of noodle as to how we can be responsive to the group with some of these questions, because I know if I kind of lob them out right now, you get some really good replies from our panel today. But allow me please to thank Bill, Cecilia, and Subarna for your conversation today. I am always empowered by this. I am confident that those who are tuning in have been empowered by it. As Cecilia said, it's not easy work, but it is rewarding work because as each person changes, as each situation changes, as organizations become to embrace all of the things that we're talking about and goes on that journey that Cecilia had talked about, that's so incredibly powerful. And as I always do on these webinars, I always love to end with just kind of recapping quickly what we kind of heard. We heard about intentionality, safety bias, right? Championing differences. Silence is deafening, right? We need to say something and do something. Subarna's, people can sniff out the BS, right? We need to kind of show up and be right. So that's really important. Listen to every voice, hear counter voices, right? You got to hear that, you got to do that. Shift in mindset, psychological safety, opportunity to report anonymously, right? Success, DEI is a business strategy, not HR, right? Be at the table, involve your ERGs. Values come with accountability. They're not just words on a piece of paper. I love that. Success to me looks like consistency. Wow, right? It's a challenge sometimes to be consistent, but there's power in that. Lean in, empower your employees, and be vulnerable. Awesome, awesome words that were shared today. So thank you, all of you. And thank you to all of you who tuned in today and asked your great questions. I encourage you to visit taftcommunications.com on March 10th for the release of our full survey results. There's some really great information in there. We touched on about 4 of the questions. There's a lot more and a lot of insights. And as Subarna said, data doesn't lie, so look at those numbers and see how you can use that as you start to have or continue those conversations in your organization. So with that, I want to thank all of you and I wish you all an amazing day. Thank you.